us today is Ted Nelson. To my right. Ted is probably the first account planner.
First American
account planner at the beginning of a revolution in advertising in the U.S. brought on by those people who helped America happen, the British. So this is a revolution on the British side that got exported here a few hundred years after
one of the many
other
reasons
revolution.
British advertising has historically been so much better than American advertising. If you ever go over there and you see some of the ads, you're like, wow, these things are just unbelievable compared to what we had here for so long.
So, and that was with Jay Chiat and Day, which is one of the more famous people in advertising, I guess.
Yeah.
We were understudy apprentice and partner in
that very famous 1984 spot that put Macintosh and Apple on the map, we did that.
Yeah. Okay, so that's some of the roots, some of the lineage, whatever. I've known Ted for quite a while. And what's been interesting about his career is that he's a pioneer, not a settler. So he's in there early, as he was back then when that worked, and worked with pioneers themselves, like Steve Jobs, who was, again, another pioneer. And there's a big difference between pioneers and settlers, and you probably know what that difference is. You're doing a little pioneering work in this class, as a matter of fact, this semester with our work with WPP. So that would cause him, as recently as, when was it?
11 years ago.
11 years ago, to move out of the top agency in Boston and start his own agency with some of his colleagues called Mechanica, and completely change the ambience, the mission, the approach, the strategy, the composition, the operation, everything, and the mechanics of how it gets done, thus Mechanica. And then kind of roar off into the sky with a whole new set of clients, many of whom didn't exist until you showed up. Clients that are invented as they work. It really represents a totally new approach. Again, coming out of the history and legacy of these very well-established, top-notch agencies to create a whole new way of working. So it's with great pleasure I'm able to introduce Ted to you as such, and I'll let him take it from there because the story is really fascinating and it's just continued, and I'm going to learn a lot today. This has been a while since we had that chat.
So it's great to be here, and Nathan doesn't know this, but this talk I'm going to give today is a highly evolved version, the genesis of which was given in the summer of the new millennium, 2000, at a big strategic planning conference in Boston, and it was the annual account planning group, APG conference. And I was on the chair at the time, I was on the board at the time, and I was giving a keynote speech on sort of evolutions in how strategy and planning and advertising is happening. So this is 15, almost 16 years ago, and it was a very different world. Facebook didn't exist. We had dial-up modems. Television advertising and television was still the dominant form of entertainment. I forget where video games were at the time, but they certainly weren't where they are now. Jaron Lanier wasn't even talking about virtual reality yet. I wanted to give, so anyway, this talk was what ultimately led to me launching Mechanica. And the ideas from the talk were what led to rethinking the mechanics of branding and getting stupid enough to leave a really good, well-compensated day job to launch a new company out of a barn in Newburyport. So it's evolved many times. It was called Branding in Chaos. And it was essentially based upon observations that I was having as the managing partner, director of strategy for a big agency, working with a lot of really interesting kinds of clients at the time. And feeling like the model, so the whole context, everything that I had learned or had been taught, and sort of a lot of the assumptions and conventions of how you create strong brands, what a strong brand relationship was all about, all that kind of stuff that was sort of so critical in the Mad Men era, sort of, everything involved in creating those great ads that they created from that period, was all kind of shifting. I had a real profound sense that the whole landscape was shifting. And so I articulated it in this talk, Branding in Chaos, and it came to really believe in the articulation, because once you sort of codify something in your mind and create a model, you of course start to see that happening all over the place, and became convinced that it was going to be a real paradigm shift in terms of brand relationships. And I'm 49 now, so I was 39, 38, 37 years old, so relatively young by my current timetable, not young by your timetable, but my current timetable. And sort of, so what do I want to be doing for the next 10, 15 years? I wanted to play in this new landscape that I had became really convinced was happening. And Clayton Christensen, who wrote a very famous book called The Innovator's Dilemma, has a great quote, which is, "Predicting the future is easy. The trick is timing." And I was probably about 5 years ahead of the curve. So we launched the company, Rethinking the Mechanics of Branding. We did okay for the first 5 years, but it wasn't like the momentum that I had expected. Clients were kind of like, "I kind of get what you're talking about. I'm kind of interested, but sounds kind of risky, sounds kind of scary. I'm not so sure I want to do that." So we sort of percolated along, and then about 5 years ago, sort of really started heating up. And right now we're currently on fire. Like Staples is having us handle their Office Max integration. We just picked up Osram, Sylvania. Big projects for Disney. Did an amazing project for the Department of State a couple of years ago. I said no to about 30 pieces of business this year because they're either too small or not interesting. We're at 30 employees working with about 30 or 40 what we call network partners in a given month. We've created an amazing sort of culture and really picky about who we hire and who we work with and the kinds of clients we work with. We've created a really neat environment that is very much capitalizing on the fact that we're in very chaotic times today. And times that are much more about inspiration and engagement and constantly changing versus sort of the times in which most thinking about branding was designed, which was times of consistency and predictability and trust. And strong brands are strong because they don't change, right? Every time you go to McDonald's, it's great about McDonald's that it's always the same. Well, it's not true anymore, is it? McDonald's is like evolving like crazy, trying to stay in business. So that's what this talk's going to be about. I'm going to cover sort of a couple of things. One is I'm going to share sort of a 10-minute version about Mechanica to give you a sense of sort of the thinking for launching something. Since a lot of you are potentially pioneers that came out of this speech, Branding in Chaos. Then I'm going to give you a brief history of branding and sort of look at some of the milestones and evolutions that have occurred. Putting stuff in context is really useful. I know sort of a lot of you, sort of the design classes that you take, you probably do a lot of looking at the history of design across different kinds of brands. And there's real periods. It's sort of like looking at the evolution of the human species. There's real periods, and I think you'll better be able to discern those periods after I talk about sort of the brief history of branding and then current time, branding and chaos. And talk about what does that mean, and what is it to create a brand in chaos, in chaotic times, and how is it different? How is it really an incredibly exciting time to be doing what you're doing? Whenever I give this, I update it with a bunch of new work that Mechanica is doing as illustrations, and I also sort of at the end of it sort of share different tools, different sort of things to think about. So the tool set always kind of evolves based on real world learnings, and the work always kind of evolves. And so there's some really tasty new work in here. So one of them hasn't even dropped yet, isn't even out there yet. It was just finished. Another one has been out for 3 days and has generated 1.8 million views in 2 days. So it's totally on fire. And so you're going to see some really fresh stuff. Everything you're going to see here is probably in the past 2 years, but you're going to see some really neat new stuff. And as I go, feel free to jump in with questions. And I'm going to cover a lot of ground. I talk about this stuff a lot, and you guys are still absorbing a lot, I realize, so don't be shy about questions. So starting with Mechanica, we're 30 people working with 30 or 40 partners. We have this space, and then we have a collaboration space a mile from there. We're getting pretty serious about opening a New York office maybe next year, so we have some real wind in our sails, and we have a lot of different kinds of workspaces and environments because we work with a lot of different kinds of partners. Our model's intensely collaborative, so we're always bringing in teams, other companies, so we have a lot of different sort of flexible ways to work together. Frequently it's virtual, other times it's in person. Usually it's a mix of the two. We position ourselves in a very different way for our business. We talk about solving problems and creating opportunities for restless marketers. So what you don't see in there is we do social media programs. What you don't see in there is we do ad campaigns. What you don't see in there is we do viral videos or events or product design. What you see is we solve problems and create opportunities for restless marketers. And that restlessness is born out of the necessity of keeping up with restless consumers. Consumers who are less and less about loyalty and more about what have you done for me lately. Consumers who are overwhelmed by options Sometimes there's so many nifty, shiny new things out there. That's something that I'd like to describe as being the impotence of abundance, actually. Like, there's so much stuff, just sort of say, I'm just going to wait for something better will come along in 5 minutes, right? It's a very, very different landscape from sort of the landscape of sort of 3 options of what to watch on TV, 5 options of what to buy in this aisle in the store, 2 ways in which you can shop. You can either order something through a catalog, you can walk into a store. There's just this incredible abundance. And if you're a marketer dealing with this abundance, if you're not restless, you're not doing your job. So we sort of tune into this restlessness that marketers feel as they're trying to keep up with consumers, using whatever tools they can beg, borrow, or steal, or invent, right? Very, very different from a media plan with a TV campaign and a print campaign and direct mail and PR. It used to be the same 4 or 5 usual suspects. Now it's like this infinite set of tools that you have. And frequently, I'm sure you all study Marshall McLuhan in your media studies class. This old adage of the medium is the message, right, is very much a part of it. Why do we have our client, Saucony in Periscope when only a couple million people are using Periscope? Because just being there for that couple of runners who experience you in Periscope, it's different, right? It says you're cutting edge, and it's as much about cutting edge shoes as it is about how you communicate and engage. There's sort of 3 pillars to what we do. The first, everything starts with strategy, and when you're sort of trying to use all the tools you have to engage customers at your disposal, the strategy and positioning conversation is a very different one. It's not just a question about what's the strategy for the ad campaign. Like the 1984 spot, the strategy for that was radical ease of use, sparked that whole campaign. Here, the strategy is about the entirety of the company. So we do strategy very differently. We have the C-suite, the CEO, the head of operations, the head of product design, line of business heads as part of the brand strategy conversation, which is really, really different. And we use data intensively, but in very different kinds of ways to spark that conversation. And we do it in a very collaborative way. So we don't come in as a consultant and say, here's the answer. We say, hey, we've been looking at the data set, and there's a sort of a range of possible paths. And the one that's the best one is the one that your cross-functional team can all embrace, because it needs to impact product design as much as it impacts marketing, as much as it impacts the culture and the design of the offices of the organization. So that's strategy. The second one is creatively expansive. You can have just a kick-ass strategy, but if you're executing it through a narrow window, you're not going to have an impact. You're not going to successfully engage all these restless consumers out there. You're not truly a restless marketer. And so creatively expansive is one of the big differences in our model. Most agencies hire a bunch of developers to create websites, or a bunch of video people to create social media programs, or a bunch of copywriters to create ad campaigns, or you invest in infrastructure. And one of the key insights that Mechanica was born on was infrastructure predetermined solutions. If you've got a bunch of mobile app developers, you never saw a problem you couldn't solve with a mobile app. If you've got a bunch of social media programs, every client a problem a client brings to you, you want to solve with social media, right? These days, those kinds of brands that communicate through very narrow windows come across as somewhat disingenuous, very marketing driven, versus those that really feel to be expressing their soul, bearing their soul to the world, to you, are communicating across many, many different channels. So we didn't want to have our hands tied by investing in people who do one thing. Rather, we wanted to be the hub of a wheel that is able to encompass all the possible creative resources out there. We even use we solved the problem with a bunch of students out of BU, recently. And I know we've worked with your Scout program as well. And so sometimes the problem requires an advertising brain surgeon. Other times it requires advertising brain surgeons who are still in school but able to tap that full spectrum. And the third part is humanly fixated. And humanly fixated is the culture we try to create, and it's a recognition of the power that emotion plays in any communications, any kind of brand engagement. But most importantly, it's the kind of relationships we try to create with our clients. Relationships that are founded upon objectivity and trust, and not always trying to sell them something they don't need, but rather what's a practical way to solve this problem. Our philosophy, our mental model is very focused on brand possibilities. This notion of keep evolving your brand along with your consumers, that cannot be more profoundly different. Half the giant firms out there have brand police. Their corporate communications people's job is to ensure that nothing changes. Everything's the same, based on logic from 50 years ago, which is brands are all about consistency. And we believe it's all about maximizing a brand's possibilities. Our whole focus is about forward momentum. We talk about our network model as being an endless creative hallway. And that is traditionally, if you're a traditional design firm or ad agency or social media firm or digital firm, you've got a creative hallway, literally a physical hallway with people who may or may not be available on a given day. And if you're a creative director, you walk down the hallway and see who happens to be available by and large. Or someone's been working on the crappy bank advertising for 2 years, and now it's their turn to do the Super Bowl spot, or they'll quit, even though they're the least qualified person to do the Super Bowl spot because they've been doing bank advertising for 2 years, but that's how it plays out. So I'm going to share with you sort of a range of output from the Endless Creative Hallway, and then I'm going to sort of dive into sort of talking a bit about the history of branding, and then share some of the things that we've learned on our little journey. Where's the audio input here? I thought it would be accommodated to the HDMI, but it's not.
It's not coming through.
Everybody hear it okay from this? Okay, we'll just go with this then. Creative hallways, you don't end up with a house style. You sort of like that everything can sort of be whatever it wants to be, because you're bringing resources on the project for whatever the project happens to be, so you're not tied to certain people who do certain things really, really well. Broad range of clients, all of them drawn to thinking very differently about branding. We actually did big projects recently for NPR and PBS at the same time. That's a funny coincidence. NPR was a neat one in terms of helping them try to figure out what their presence in the physical world should be. Just awarded Osram, Sylvania, Nationwide. Their business is being incredibly disrupted by chaos. It used to be the lighting business was replacement bulbs. Every year and a half, your bulb burns out. Your fluorescent bulbs burns out 3 years. Now it's all shifting to LED. So the bulb is there forever. It never burns out, basically. And so their whole business model has changed from one of replacement, trying to beat, the Lowe's house of bulbs, to if you don't win the socket the first time, game over, right? So their business is being turned upside down. This old German company, they're splitting in two. They're making all kinds of changes, and they said, you know what, we need to think about a brand differently, right? So what Mechanica is about makes all the sense in the world. Staples, we're helping them redesign the packaging for half of the stuff that they do, and they just awarded us the integration of Office Max, this massive acquisition they did. They have a 160-person internal agency, and they felt like they needed significant help beyond that. So they reached out to us, again, drawn to our very, very different approach. Akamai, big high technology company, gets a lot of attention, made high-speed streaming video, content delivery network possible, and they hired us as their first ever agency. They're headquartered in Cambridge because they had reached about $1.2 billion in revenue. They had sort of outgrown the ability to go it alone, but they had 30 very talented internal people, so they wanted a partner who's going to collaborate with those people rather than try to put those people out of business. So they're drawn to the Mechanica model. So sort of like back to Clayton Christensen's quote about, the trick is timing. The time is really happening right now in terms of thinking differently about brands, but also the notion of the role of collaboration really being more important than ever. So let me jump into sort of the trajectory that took us to where we are today with a brief history of branding. Branding started out, prepare yourself for this visual. It started out very much about sort of provenance and trust, right? Who's it from? Can I trust them, right? I know that cow belongs to this person. If I'm buying the beef, I know that it's not going to be tainted, right? So it's very basic, fundamental kinds of things. And sort of the first evidence of brands in that capacity goes way back to sort of the Christian era and medieval era, where you had town criers using things that resembled brands. Printing press obviously had a big impact in terms of the ability to distribute information, but information is different from a brand, right? And so the notion of brand, information that's associated with someone, a certain writer or a certain newspaper, was again an earlier manifestation of brand. But again, brand was then still very much about provenance, where's it coming from, and trust, right? Can I trust it? It wasn't until really sort of post-war when TV started to take off, and Ivory Soap is famously one of the first sort of classic brands as we think about brands, and you had sort of the post-war prosperity and this boom and this birth of this mass market when stuff really started to get moving. And so sort of that first shift was classic, sort of the American dream as we think about it. It was a unique period in time. Post-war America, massive productive capacity. We were all on the same page, more or less. Culturally, we were all immigrants from one place or another, sort of figuring it all out together. And so it was this magical, very short period of time that we tend culturally to look back on as a country as something that is the norm, but it wasn't the norm. It was just an interesting period in time. But it's really where sort of this definition of the American dream was born. And there were a couple of things that happened then that were really critical to sort of how brands worked. One is you had a large, targetable, homogeneous mass market. Many people. You could say I'm going after, women, moms, 25 to 34, and you could actually reach them because they all watched these 3 shows and read these 2 magazines. So you could reach them. And you could be reasonably confident that a message that would work with one of them would work with the others because they were relatively consistent. And you could even guess that a woman 25 to 34 was going to be a mom. So you're able to create these very, very powerful brand relationships. A couple of other aspects that are important to the times. Supply chains, how stuff gets made. They were very simple. They were integrated. They were usually under one roof or controlled by one company. So when a company was manufacturing or designing something, they could control it completely. And once they controlled it, it was hard for competitors to disrupt it too quickly. They couldn't source the same manufacturers in Asia. You had limited media distribution channels. Distribution, how the product gets out was limited. You had grocery stores and you had catalogs, right? And maybe if you lived out in the country, you could go to the farm. But you had limited ways of getting stuff and limited media channels. There were only a couple of choices in terms of how you actually reach someone. Product innovation this is really important, was episodic versus continuous. So product innovation was you created something new, and then you put it out to the market and advertised it, and you knew that everyone saw it, and they saw the message 3 times, and they were going to try it, and you could just make money off of that for years, right? It wasn't, and you could just keep it more or less as it was. You could do new and improved every couple of years, but it wasn't a fundamental alteration to the product, right? And as a consumer, once you figured out what kind of soap to buy, you kind of just stick with that. Right now, we're rethinking the soap we buy every time we walk into a store, right? We're just not loyal anymore to anything because product innovation has become continuous. Limited competitive set. Usually there were 3 or 4 competitors that anybody knew about. And there may have been other competitors, but consumers had no way to find out about them, right? So this notion of whatever it was, everyone knew who the competition was, and it was a short set. There's a term from Boston Consulting Group called cash cows. And it's from a model in terms of how you manage a brand and a business over time. And a cash cow is something that everybody knows about it. It's making lots of money, and you have a reason. It's not terribly innovative, but it's going to keep on making money for a long time, right? So an Ivory soap, a Coca-Cola, Budweiser, cash cows. They just sit there and they just generate profit for companies for years and years and years. Once you create a strong brand, you can invest in that brand. You could invest lots and lots of money, confident that once the brand became established, it was just going to just create profits for you for a long, long time. So that was a great time to be in branding. And that's why they could have 3 martinis for lunch, right? Because they're just, once you figured it out, you figured it out. It's very simple. You only had 20 ad agencies, maybe 15 ad agencies in New York at that point in time. So it's a very great time to be in branding, to be profiting from brands, and to be a consumer, right? It was simple. You didn't have to make all these choices. So then, this is really important, the model then is brands were promises. So they went from being just pure, solely associated, sort of provenance, association, and trust to a promise, right? Trustworthiness, distinctiveness, Ivory soap, 99.9% pure, that's what makes it different, and consistency. Consistency is really what brands were about. If you talk to any brand manager back then, most of their effort was spent on ensuring that you don't mess up this cash cow that's generating all this money. Consistency. Don't change anything. The value of brands is the fact that they don't change. The brand builder in a company was really sort of a research-driven manager, if you will. And the designer was an inventor. The designer would say, here's a problem, I'm going to invent a solution. And then a company would buy that solution, or they're within a company, and they would turn it into one of those cash cows. The designer was an inventor, and it was a wonderful time, right? Lots of wonderful things were invented. They filled the store shelves. They filled the center of the aisle. Interesting thing happening right now is the center of stores, no one's shopping the center anymore. They shop the periphery. I'll talk more about that, but the whole foundation of sort of the American dream and modern brands was the center of the store, where all these brands lived, and no one goes there anymore. It's complete, and it caught all the packaged goods manufacturers by surprise, and I'll show that in a second. Shift number 2, we'll call that keeping up with the Joneses. So shift number 1 is we're all together post-war, we've all got the same kinds of jobs, and we're all more similar than different. And we have no class system in America. We're all the middle class, right? Shift number 2 was one of aspiration and storytelling and accessible luxury, and it was a really interesting time. First of all, you had a splintering class system, and people sort of aspired to be part of other social classes or other experiences. Did you go to this place? Did you go to this fancy place? Did you? This is actually a shot from a Lilly Pulitzer ad, and sort of what she represented was this very closed world of inherited wealth. We spent their time in Boston and Florida, and so in fact, a very few people could be part of that. Sort of the limited number of inherited wealthy people back then, but everyone aspired to it. So then Lilly Pulitzer herself was actually kind of a reject from the family, but she knew that lifestyle. So she created this brand that really took off in the 80s, late 70s and 80s, which is all about, by wearing these clothes, you will believe that you're part of this world that lives in Florida and Boston, and there's only 10 families who actually are part of that world, right? So this notion of aspirations, by driving a BMW or by driving a Cadillac. What you had at this time is you had decline of functional differentiation, the rise of emotional differentiation. So it was less about 99.9% pure, and it was more about live the dream. Here's the dream. You can be part of this, whatever that dream is, in relation to whatever category it was. You had an accelerating pace of innovation, but the innovation was more incremental and trend-driven rather than substantive, and you had a rise of the global supply chain. So all of a sudden, products themselves became a little bit more interchangeable than they were, because a lot of the suppliers were similar, and so you started getting a more competitive set. A lot of the the profit margins came from this notion that hadn't been labeled this yet, but it was the same thing, accessible luxuries that the masses can use to distinguish themselves as being part of this class system or that class systems. So brands shifted. The forefront of branding shifted from being predicated upon promises. Promises were still important, but the leading edge thinking was in terms of aspirations, much more emotional differentiation, much less functional. This scrubbing pad scrubs better than that scrubbing pad. More about depicting a lifestyle. Telling stories that invite belief and belonging was very much a part of what branding and advertising was all about. And the brand builder became more of a creative storyteller. And the designer became more of a trend spotter creator. It was really more about trends. Invention was still important, and obviously those two are closely related, but it's more about being on trend or creating a new trend. It was less about necessarily solving a problem, because all the basic problems have been solved, right? As a culture, we were above level 1 on Maslow's hierarchy, so now it's much more about aspirations and trends and feeling differently, right? So this is when brands like BMW and Mercedes and Tiffany and the Walt Disney World experience, they all just took off, right, like crazy, because there were all these sort of these worlds that you could aspire to be part of. A couple days at Disneyland, every time you got into your car, when you presented a ring to your fiancée to be, hopefully, these brands really represented a story. Right? Think about the story tied up in that Tiffany box. Think about that story as your family goes to Disney World for the first time. Think about that story when you've reached that point in your career, you're hopping into a Mercedes, right? All of a sudden, you've elevated yourself above the masses, right? Accessible luxury. So that was a very powerful, very profitable machine. You had fewer cash cows, more trend-driven. And a brand had to stay on trend, right? So Mercedes, BMW, Disneyland, they had to introduce new stuff within the context of the brand relationship to stay on trend. Shift number 3, we'll call that trouble in paradise. Consumers start to get a little restless, and marketers need to get a little restless as well. Continuous innovation in splintering markets. Cultural anthropologist out of Canada wrote a book that I always recommend called Culture by Commotion. His name is Grant McCracken, and a term that he sort of brought back from the ancient Greeks was this notion of plenitude. This notion of there is so much diversity, so much complexity in our modern day cultural landscape that it's really, there's no homogeneous anything. We all have our subcultures we're part of, right? And whether you're into massively parallel gaming, or whether you're someone who's a live-action role-playing LARP person, there's a million, you can't even label them anymore. There's so many different little subcultures, and so many different kinds of distribution channels, and so many different competitive offerings that sort of the traditional branding models are starting to sort of really have problems. You had an explosion of distribution information channels. How you get a product now, there's like an infinite number of options. How you become informed becomes really complicated, and sort of the supply chain has become very disintermediated. No one controls it anymore. Sort of long tail consumption, and all freakish things like the explosion of vinyl as being the most profitable segment in the music industry, right? Who would have guessed, right? You have all these kinds of weird long tail kinds of things happening. People buying long tail as people sort of small groups of people buying small groups of products, and together it represents a big market, but the product and the consumer is not the same, right? It's a very different business model. This trouble in paradise is not just sort of philosophical or interesting to observe, it's very, very real. Blue Chip Landor and Associates tracks brands going way back, and they sort of do the definitive study every year. They trot it out, and the whole pantheon of brands at the top flipped upside down about 10 years ago. I mean, all of a sudden, sort of the brands that lived on the top weren't even in the top 10 anymore. Dramatic, just massive destruction and creation of brand value. Cookie cutter approaches lose their mass appeal one after the other. Brands based on consistency were just sort of seeing their shares drop off. The hotel business, big rooms no more, right? The whole hotel business now is about all these boutique hotels. It's no longer about one big hotel that you've arrived, you're at the Hilton, you've arrived, you're at the Four Seasons. Now it's all about the discovery hotel of the moment. Total profound shift. A guy named Geoffrey Moore, who wrote a very influential book called Crossing the Chasm, had a great line that sort of characterizes this branding and chaos phenomenon. In an era when the pace of change was slower, the variety of products and services fewer, the channels of communication and distribution less pervasive, and the consumer less sophisticated, marketing could enjoy prolonged periods of relative stability, reaping profits from holding the customer constant and optimizing the other variables. This is no longer the case. You picture people in lab coats, like holding the customer constant, optimizing all the other variables. I remember working with like research people in big packaged goods firms, and they really were like PhDs in research. They had no empathic human skills whatsoever, and they treated basically consumers as lab rats, and they just got the equation right. The consumer would not be able to resist, they would have to buy the product, right? It was an amazing relationship. And what Moore's pointing out is that whole thing got flipped upside down and totally blown up, and that takes us to branding and chaos, right? Very, very different times, and sort of how you think about brands, how you create brands has changed just really, really dramatically. And I've been sort of, a couple of the themes, sort of just incredible proliferation of options, whether you're into fashion or games or music, doesn't soap, whatever you're into. You all know there's an infinite number of options, right? shoes, running shoes, you name it, bikes, whatever you're into, there is an infinite set of options. I can't find anybody anymore who's into music, or who's into bikes, or who's into shoes, whatever the thing is. Like, do you know all the options out there? No way. Part of the fun is just discovering new ones, right? Think about that profound shift, number one. Number two, death of the homogeneous market, rise of an infinite number of subcultures, right? By the time you put a label on it, it's passé, right? What's the next Brooklyn movement going to be? What's the next soy movement going to be? What's the next, you name it, there's always something happening, right? And the food aisle is just constantly changing, right? You're almost drawn to something, oh, that's kind of cool, because it's got that cool, it's gluten-free. I don't know why I should care about that, but I want it, right? Because that's sort of, and 5 minutes later, it'll be something else, right? Even the rules of what you should eat, what's healthy, what's not healthy is changing every 5 minutes now. It used to be you had the food pyramid you were taught in school, and you kind of believed that was how you should eat, right? And it kind of worked for 10, 15 years. Now the rules are changing every time you open the paper or jump online to sort of figure out what's the latest studies show. Distribution channels and media options, again, you can be informed a million different ways. The notion of media and information you trust, you got to figure it out as you go, right? Because none of it's trustworthy anymore. It's all just different information sources. You sort of combine a picture and reach your own decision based on it, but you don't believe just because it came from CNN, it's true, right? That's a starting point for an investigation you do on your own to reach a conclusion, rather than trust based on the source. So you have tremendous, tremendous complexity. And complexity is what results in chaos. And chaotic systems are inherently unpredictable, right? So if you think about branding, be about consistency, you figure it all out, you invest your money, you know you're gonna hit these brand awareness levels, these brand preference levels, these repeat purchases, and you know it's gonna last for 14 years of taking the money to the bank. That's all out the window. And it's kind of fun, I'm sure you've read about a lot of this stuff, but chaotic systems are impossible to predict. Even massively, sort of linked parallel batteries of computers around the world can't predict the weather very well yet, right? And we've all seen sort of charts of some of these chaotic systems. They're beautiful to look at, but they're not very actionable, right? Kind of hard as a brand builder to act on it. These are the kinds of charts that brand builders like, right? They like charts like this, that sort of just nice, slow builds up, right? This is Fortune shareholder returns of heavily branded versus unbranded companies, going up until right around when I gave my talk, October New Millennium, Feb 1, June 1, October 1, right? So what's happening here is that wonderful period, right, we're talking about, brands as aspirations, boom, 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 boom. Look at heavily branded companies, how much better they're doing than the average unbranded companies, right? Wow, this is awesome, this is awesome, this is awesome, whoa, right? And the roller coaster ride just like boom, right? Having a brand, maybe it helps you, maybe it doesn't. Depends what you do with it, right? It's no longer something that's bankable. But that's the kind of chart that traditional branding likes. This is the kind of chart that depicts most of the systems that brands are being created in today. So very, very different times. I don't know if anyone saw this. This was in the Times last Sunday. So we're right in the real world right now. For the large established food companies, this is having disastrous consequences. Essentially, this massive shift towards local, healthy ingredients is not just the foodies in Boston and Brooklyn, it's nationwide. Everyone's reverting back to how they bought before sort of like mass markets were created. And it's turning the business upside down, dramatically. To survive, the food industry will need more than its current bag of tricks. There is a consumer shift at play that calls into question the reason packaged foods exist. We have a client, Highliner Foods. It's the leading sea cuisine, all these brands of high-end frozen fish, billion-plus-dollar company. Their whole business is being turned upside down. They're like, help us. We have no idea, right? They're thinking of completely changing their supply chain, how they source fish, how they sell it, how they position it. It's dramatic for years and years, and now they're just like dropping off the cliff. Everything's up for play. So one thing I think I've been beating on a lot, and the word paradigm shift is overused in so many areas, but this truly is a paradigm shift in terms of the most classic definition of one. And it's moved from a world of consumption and brand building predicated upon consistency and predictability to one that's about inspiration and engagement. What have you done for me lately? Hometown favorite or conquered, consistency is a hobgoblin of feeble minds, right? This notion of consistency that was sort of the power of branding is now much less interesting. So, think about complexities. Order does emerge from complexity. Facebook emerges from complexity. The new winners in the food landscape are going to emerge from complexity, but you just can't predict. You just don't know where it's going to come from, right? And so it's not, you can't create predictable models because it's so complicated. There's so many variables that you can't figure out, and all the unintended consequences are beyond the ability to. So it's like plotting the weather. Hence, we come to brand possibilities, and the current times that we're in that are brands as inspirations. Very, very different times. Brands as inspirations are anchored in shared values, inspirational possibilities, and engagement, constant engagement. Developed through actively involving customers in a continuous conversation and process of ongoing innovation anchored in underlying shared values. What does that mean? That means actually you pretty much, your product development team is only part of the process, and you bring your consumers literally into your company and put them in charge of product development. A client of ours, Communispace, big local company, became very, very successful from like 10 employees to hundreds, sold to Omnicom about 2 years ago. We were their agency partner for 7 years. What they did was created a model of bringing communities of consumers virtually into the product development process. So they didn't just do what they did for 20 years, what marketers did for 20 years, which was once the brilliant product developers had figured it out, they'd show them in focus groups to consumers and say, do you like the color? Do you like the ad? Product was baked, right? Developed by the brilliant designers. Now, it's let's bring the consumers into the process where, what are your problems? What solutions do you suggest, right? And it's the crowdsource model, right? It's the Kickstarter model being brought into Fortune 500 companies. And so how products are designed is changing dramatically. The brand builder now becomes much more of an inspirational muse and a partner, right? Couldn't be more different from the model of what the brand builder was in the past. And the designer, and this is really important to you all, it becomes a creative collaborator in a continuous process. You were talking earlier about sort of the design exercise. You guys are doing all these iterations, right? All these iterations, this constant process. If you're doing it successfully, you feel like a collaborator in sort of like a jazz improv session, right? Rather than someone who has a firm belief in what it should be. And we all know the brands that come out of this, right? I mean, Google, its positioning was do no evil, right? They had a core product, obviously, the search engine, but they've really structured themselves. They broke themselves now into Alphabet. They've really structured themselves around being able to respond and collaborate with the market. Google Glass is a failure, not a big deal. We'll try something else, right? So it's not predicated upon one hit or miss kind of thing. This is the original Starbucks logo. Their positioning, in Howard Schultz's mind, was the third place. Which was not home and not work, but this third place. That was the positioning. He did not think of it as we sell expensive coffee or we're a cafe. We are this third place, right? It's allowed them to do some really interesting, really kinds of dynamic kinds of evolution. And when you start with that vision, right, that's a very different kind of position. That's a position that's about inspiration rather than consistency. It invites improvisation. Let's try this. Let's try music. Let's try instant coffee. Who thought you could ever do instant coffee from a place that sold $4 cups of coffee, right? Well, of course you can. They're both completely compatible when you're the third place. Virgin's a brilliant early example. I like Virgin because it's mostly physical products, but they trade in an ethos and attitude and perspective, whether it's Virgin Weddings or Virgin Medical or Virgin Health or Virgin Airlines or Virgin Music. Completely disparate categories, right? But you know there's something that ties those all together that you identify with as a consumer. So that's branding and chaos. Before I get into the new toolkit, which is sort of examples of how do you navigate in this landscape and how do you create really wonderful brand work in this landscape. Any questions in terms of sort of, I've covered a lot of stuff here, right? Sort of like these sort of seismic shifts. Yeah.
So you spoke of like unbranded like products. How is that different from anti-branding? Like companies like Alex and Ani, where they kind of take pride in being very simplistic and level and.
Yeah. So anti-branding. I wasn't really talking about unbranded products. I was talking about the brand relationship changing, but I think the anti-branding question is interesting. It's a great one. So for example, Adbusters is a brand, right? Anti-brands are brands, and they're based upon we are not everything our competitors are. Competitors are mass market brands. We're the opposite of that, right? And so that's an anti-brand. Anti-brands eventually become brands. but you're buying into an anti-brand because, if you have a favorite Brooklyn homemade pickle shop, that's an anti-brand, right? They don't call themselves anti-brand. Other times a brand calls itself an anti-brand, and they position themselves around that. So that is a brand. That's a great example of saying, don't expect us to behave like your grandparents' brand, right? We're going to change. We're going to innovate. We're going to really work to serve not just your functional needs, but also your emotional needs, right? And we're going to evolve along with you. So whether that's shared values, how we manufacture things, our supply chain, how we invest our profits, those are all anti-brand kinds of things, right? Patagonia gives a ton of money every year to charitable causes, right? A significant percentage. They're among the first to do that. That's an anti-brand kind of thing. Brands traditionally are about returning profits to shareholders, right? So there's lots of anti-brand characteristics, and some have tied those all up into a neat bundle. Soon, I'm sure there'll be an anti-brand. But that's a nice illustration, yeah.
You spoke to a little bit, I don't remember whether it was the second or the third, of this idea of brands as stories, and kind of what you feel when you do it. Tiffany's is a great example. Do you think that's really gone, or do you think it's just shifted in how we use it? Because I think that even though consumers still have infinite options, that story that the brand tells them is still kind of core to motivating shopping.
It's a great question, and so I want to sort of look a couple in. So all of these systems coexist, right? No new media, no new way displaces the others. My favorite example of that is the Gutenberg Bible didn't put the church out of business. TV didn't kill radio. Digital MP3 didn't kill vinyl. It all exists, right? And it all has. So if you have an amazing functional breakthrough, if you have a radically different product, beat the drum of that, right? You actually have a unique selling proposition. That's fabulous. If you are a brand based on amazing stories, Ralph Lauren, that's having massive issues right now, but still doing okay, tell those stories, right? And spin those stories. But sort of the front lines of branding, where more and more of the opportunities are, is based around this evolution. And the nature of the stories change. So it used to be the story, the Ralph Lauren story. Ralph Lauren is a classic example, a great example of an aspirational phase 2 brand. Right? Storytelling, opening the doors to another class, another world. All you have to do is walk into and it's a storytelling brand based upon consistency, right? Every Ralph Lauren, high-end Ralph Lauren store, whether it's on Fifth Avenue or the Bund in Shanghai or in Stockholm, wherever you walk in, they're all the same, telling the same story, right? Now, storytelling brands are evolving in real time. So the story is a work in progress, right? So then again, so both those worlds can coexist. And part of that is, as a brand builder, having that moment of sort of self-awareness and perspective and thoughtfulness that says, what's the right approach to this, right? Because there isn't one single model. But more often than not, the action is on brands that evolve rapidly along with their customers.
So you were talking about how consumers have this paradox of choice, which has kind of led them to be not loyal to any one brand. But I still feel like as a consumer that there are a lot of companies out there who are in maybe subconscious ways vying for my trust. For example, Google. One way I trust Google is the fact that it has so many free services that really just work well and integrate into my life, so that I trust them. There are other
perfect. Pause for a second.
Sure.
You trust them because they have so many services, right? So their consistency, what's defined around, is around evolving along with you, right? Versus I trust them because they're the ultimate performance machine, or I trust them because the secret Coca-Cola formula never changes, nobody knows it. And one time they tried to change, and they went back to how they were, right? And so the notion of that relationship is based on constant reinvention, right? And you trust them to do that, right? You trust them to evolve along with you. So brand loyalty is not dying, but what that loyalty is founded upon is evolved, right? The reason Starbucks has been so wildly successful, a lot of us may loathe them if we're real coffee fans, but they have consistently evolved along with their customers, right? And as we as Americans wanted to turn a great latte into a milkshake with 1,000 calories, they've evolved right along with that need, right? But at the same time, an entire parallel universe of cortados and exclusive high-end boutique coffee has taken off at the same time, right? So all these worlds sort of coexist, and loyalty is just one earned in a different kind of way, and sustaining loyalty is achieved in a different kind of way. The great Yvon Chouinard of Patagonia, he's a great example of a great modern day brand that's they asked him why he was going into surfing. Like, huge investments into all these surfing into wetsuits made of only environmentally recycled materials and almost no one was buying them because they're so expensive because he's doing them in sort of this very special kind of way. And he said, well, the planet's warming, the water sea levels are rising. I'm building this company to last forever, so we're going to have to really be in the water business because there's not going to be any more snow in 50 years, you know? So we got to figure it out now, right? And so that's a great example of a brand that just sort of evolves along with their customers and changing times. So let me jump into this new toolkit now. This is a fun chance to share some work and talk about how we actually apply some of this stuff.
Was there one other question?
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Well, so you were mentioning about how it's hard to predict anything now because of just chaos. You don't really know. You can't show like this is what your profit's going to be like. So then, how do you convince customers to like let you take over and do something?
Yeah, so you don't convince them to let them take over, but you actually sort of spark some engagement and try to sustain that, right? So you try to get them involved and then try to keep them interested in what you're doing, and so and then you sort of watch as that grows. You think about sort of how fundraising for startups has happened, where you have the angel round, and the A round, the B round, the C round, and then going public, right? What that is that's basically investors saying, we don't know. So we're going to hedge our bets, right? We know that Procter & Gamble isn't doing anything terribly innovative. So startups are where it's at. But we're not going to give them all the money at the beginning, right? We're going to give them small bits so they can go out there and try stuff and see what consumers take to, and then feed that once they do, right? So, and it's okay to pivot. It's okay to change 5 times, right? No investor an angel investor is going to ding you for your business model changing 5 times. That's the expectation, right? Because you can't predict. So someone who comes to you and says, here's my plan for 5 years. If you walk into any top venture capital firm and say, here's a 5-year plan, they may think the idea is good, but they're going to completely discount the plan. They're not loaning you money against what it's going to be worth in 5 years. They're going to say, let's see what you can do in year 1, right? Let's see where this ends up. And then if we think it's interesting, then we'll do an A round, a B round, a C round to see, to defeat it as it kind of evolves and finds its sweet spot, right? Watching Snapchat evolve, for example, has been wonderful, right? It's really become quite different in a lot of ways. It's much richer, very different kind of thing than what it started out as, and who knows what it'll ultimately, become. So, new toolkit. First one is one of the sacred conventions of brands are taglines. And taglines you slap on the bottom of an ad campaign. Taglines are invented by the ad agency, they're owned by the agency and the client brand police, and a tagline is only as good as long as you have the ad campaign. Taglines usually are really carefully crafted in relation to the ad campaign, and so they don't last very long. So they're good for maybe a year and a half, they move on to a new tagline, generally, not always, but frequently. And we've really moved to model something. The other thing, taglines are very much sort of they're owned and controlled by the marketing people. So they don't inspire product development people. They don't inspire internal stuff. They tend to be very much locked into marketing. So we've invented this idea called the governing brand idea. And a governing brand idea is an overarching creative thought that is not tied to an ad campaign, and it's designed to be used by everyone in the company for all kinds of purposes. So, for example, for Saucony, the governing brand idea 7 years ago, when they were number 7 at Run Specialty, so Greater Boston Running Company, so Run Specialty Store, they were number 7. They're now number 3. It's just incredible growth over our course of working together. Find Your Strong has been the governing brand idea. Find Your Strong is based on essentially this insight that every runner runs for a different reason. If you interview 20 people before the Chicago Marathon or before a Tuesday morning fun run, you'll get that many different reasons as to why you run. Running is the only event professionally where you have Olympic athletes and first timers in the same event. Think about that. Incredible. So it's not all about just do it, personal achievement. It's not all about run happy. It's about why do you run, inviting engagement. And most runners, huge number of fitness runners who run 30 miles a week don't think of themselves as even runners. I run for this reason or that reason, and running helps me achieve this, but I'm not a runner, even though they're running 30 miles a week. It's really quite remarkable. And so the position was Find Your Strong. I'll share with you a video that sort of creates a sense of how that governing brand idea played out across all different kinds of approaches. And I'm going to see if I think this speaker is working. I think I might know.
I think the panels on the back wall there,
Is it not on the back wall? Let's see if this is... Oh, there we go. I think this will do it.
Categories is not categories. Saucony branding also spent by literally hundreds of millions of dollars. To break through, Mechanica helped them dig deep and make an emotional connection with runners everywhere.
What is strong? Is it muscle? Or something more? Is it your best time? Or your worst day? Maybe strong is just what you have left when you've used up all your weak.
Saucony's new invitation to runners to find their strong debuted with the brand's first ever national TV spot. By intentionally leaving the definition of strong open, we were able to speak to all athletes, from the elite runners to the everyday joggers. And best of all, it allowed us to engage the running community directly with the Find Your Strong project. Once on the site, runners shared their personal thoughts, passions, images, and running inspirations, and connected with others who share their love of running. We created a series of micro-documentaries with runners who had inspired Saucony, including moms, cancer survivors, Olympic athletes, all in an effort to inspire others to run. A series of weekly challenges kept the excitement, participation, and the results growing. And in the end, Find Your Strong helped Saucony connect with the running community like never before, creating a powerful mosaic of running inspiration.
So their cloud score, which has become sort of the new barometer of brand awareness, which is sort of a social media measure that takes into account a lot of stuff, but basically just social media prominence, has just tied Nike's, and it's been a fraction of the dollars. The problem is Nike, either you identify with it or you don't. Find Your Strong is a big place that lets you in. Their product development team has really embraced that as well, and it's had a real interesting impact on the product development. This is a third-party group that tracks what they call brand love. We basically have passion for the brand, irrespective of anything else. And Saucony exceeds everybody else. It basically generated more passion for the brand through being very unpredictable, very broad range of self-identifying sort of approaches. So it's a nice illustration of the power of an overarching creative thought designed to endure, but designed to spark lots of inspirational, constantly changing programs within that. I'll share some more Saucony work in a bit. Another tool is sparking engagement. How do you sort of create stories that require audience participation? It's not complete without audience participation. So this will get a little esoteric into ad land, but one of the big things that great agency DDB, Doyle Dane Bernbach, famous for all the famous Volkswagen advertising from the 60s. It's ugly, but it gets you there. Just really super influential from a design and creative standpoint in the advertising and design worlds. One of the most famous art directors came out of there. Anyway, they were the first to pair up copywriters and art directors. You used to get copywriters off generating copy, then you go down to the wrist in the studio to sort of, just make visual. And so what you had redundant, but the visual was merely an expression of what the copy said, right? It was not a concept, it was just two different things saying the same thing. Concept, it's ugly, but it gets you there, and you see the Volkswagen or any of the great advertising of the 70s and 80s and 90s. Without the copy, just the visual would be meaningless, and without the visual would be meaningless. It was that pairing, right? Well, the great pairing of our times, spark engagement, is the agency and the consumer, right? And the best work without the consumer is meaningless. All that Saucony work without the consumer, it's meaningless. It's nothing. It doesn't exist, right? And so sparking engagement is a really interesting tool, especially if you say, what if I created something that would be completely meaningless if the consumer didn't contribute to it? And so this is an example. This was a really interesting assignment a couple of years ago, but it's one of my favorites. It just wildly successful, tons of attention, was how do we sell hard copies of dictionaries to millennials, all right? American Heritage, out of Boston, they're a big cash cow every 5 years. Is their big, thick dictionary, right? All new words in it. It's really like an amazing dictionary. But selling a physical dictionary to millennials was an interesting challenge, right? Because we all have ubiquitous dictionaries on our smartphones, and and online. And so the insight was that, interestingly, we have a group who ostensibly is less interested in language than ever, but they're more expressive. We express ourselves more through language than anybody in your time, and it's out there. So we're broadcasting it all the time. So how do you spark that awareness in a way that requires engagement?
More than just communicating. They tell the world who you are. In essence, you are the words you use are about more than just communicating. They tell the world who you are. In essence, you are your words. That's the concept behind the campaign to launch the 5th edition of the American Heritage Dictionary. The site for the campaign brings the concept to life in a very literal way, engaging people to create a self-portrait composed from their own words. Visitors to youareyourwords.com upload a photo or use their webcam to take a picture of themselves. They then connect to Facebook or Twitter to pull in words from their social stream or type in words that best define who they are. A custom server-side application then composites a user's chosen words with their photo, creating a unique word-based self-portrait. The site was created from the outset without requiring the use of Flash or HTML5, meaning the server had to do much of the heavy lifting. To further personalize their portrait, users can adjust the look of their image in a number of ways, including color palette, typeface, and contrast. Finished portraits can be shared on the major social networks and downloaded for printing or sharing via email.
So this hit right when Pinterest was taking off. It was a magical combination, like boom. So here is. Let me remember what this one is. Let's see what this is.
We've all seen fights on TV.
Okay, yeah. All right. So this is brand new. This is the one that has not out there yet. So it's part of a new program for Golden Draak, which is a great old Belgian beer. Historically pretty successful, but this whole little craft beer phenomenon in the United States clearly isn't going away. And so if you're a great beer that's as good as any modern beer, you have a problem, right? Used to be Belgian beer was a good beer, you turn to it now, there's so many options, right? So they're basically trying to figure out how to insert ourselves into the beer conversation in a way that sparks engagement, because craft beer is all about engagement, right? So how do you do that? And Golden Draak requires some bravery because it's a Belgian beer. It's not an IPA, it's not an overhopped IPA, but it's a very different kind of flavor than you've had before. And so this whole program's been created. This is one of a bunch of these things, which is designed to spark engagement and have people contribute things that are then turned into things. And you'll see how this plays out.
We've all seen fights on TV and in the movies. And I'm sure I'm not the only one that's thought this, but could I take a punch? My name is Nathan Knott. I'm not a boxer. I'm a data analyst, and today I'm conquering what it's like to take a punch.
Everybody shares their fears. Careful what you share.
I've never done anything even remotely like this before. So I'm definitely getting a boom of adrenaline
is the
in my
mass middleweight
chest.
champion.
And apparently the guy I'm going to be fighting is a middleweight champion, so I got that going for me. But I can't wait to get in there and give it a shot. Here we go. You can see Russell coming in low, getting me to drop my guard. And then he's going to come through with his with that left. Oh, and I guess on the right on this one. Yeah. All I can remember is disorientation. I'm trying to get my feet under me, but what are you afraid of?
enjoyed that when I saw it. And here's, I think this is the last one, which is a really important one, which is sort of mind the intersections. And I've always been sort of addicted to intersections, both for insights as well as ways to sort of get something out there. And we've had a tremendous amount of luck. I want to show you some Saucony work I thought you guys will really enjoy. But we've been doing this across a lot of different clients, which is really figuring out how do you connect with people who already have lots of connections, which is really interesting. So you basically look out the landscape, right, find individuals who have massive followers, massive social media channels, and then you get them to not just endorse your product for money, which is the lamest, most disingenuous thing in the world, but how do you get them to actually love your brand and co-create something with them? So, very different way for how you approach them. Because first of all, you have to say, as a brand, you have to get a client comfortable with this notion of who knows where this is going to go, right? We're going to invest dollars and effort to co-create something with someone we don't even know if they're going to create something, right? So for starters, it's a very different expectation with the client. Not about consistency, right? It's about guard down. Then, how you approach them. It's not, we're Saucony, you're so lucky to have us want to create a TV spot of you. It's, hey, you're into running, we're into running, let's have some conversations, let's see if some sparks happen. If they do, let's create something, who knows, right? So we've done a series of these, they're called seeker stories, because you can't find your strong if you're not seeking. And they've been beyond belief successful. I'm going to share two of you. What's one I'm going to play right now just dropped 2 days ago, and it generated, I think it could be close to, yeah, it's just unbelievable social media coverage, exposure, and that's led to emails keep coming in, even as I parked today. Fast Company picked it up. It's like 18 different media channels have picked up the story in the past day and a half. It's ridiculous, and you'll see why. So mind intersections, and here's how you create stuff, and surrender tons of control.
I used to have this idea that if I stopped running, this, like mid-run, if I stopped, this sort of overweight, sad version of myself, which was following me, would catch me and I'd become it. And that's what ended up becoming the Blurch.
Hi, my name's Bunky, and this is a film about Matthew Inman. This is his mom, and this is his dad, Dennis. And this is them on their wedding day, and together they created Matthew. Gross. This is Matthew in 1989. He was 7. He loved to eat hot dogs growing up in Idaho. This is Matthew in 1993. This is Matthew with his brother. This is Matthew's 6th grade girlfriend who left him for his brother.
You know, I was deeply in love with her. I may even still love her, I don't know.
This is the house he grew up in with 17 cats before it burned down, along with the cats.
So that was kind of sad, but at least I didn't have to clean the litter box anymore.
These are all the things he saved from the fire. What 5 words would you use to describe yourself back then?
Mullet, fat, insecure, creative, hungry.
Matthew spent a lot of time in front of computers as a kid.
Kind of hunched over with that T-Rex sort of physique happening. I started running when I was 23 years old. It's one of the very few things I can do that gives me kind of a sense of peace. But when people think of runners, they think that I wake up and I do Pilates and then I have kale for breakfast. No, I wake up and I'm running because I have a hangover and I had like corn dogs for breakfast.
These are the things around Matthew's house. This is his dog, Rambo. He made a game called Exploding Kittens. He also created a comic, The Oatmeal, as well as written some books and painted these paintings. And he's also pretty well known on the internet.
They call us celebrities with a W, which is the worst thing I've ever heard. I wish I could tell you I ran because it's good for my heart, but really I run so that I can eat birthday cake.
This is Matthew eating birthday cake in a Blurch suit.
The Blurch came together while I was running. It became this little fat cherub with wings who floats behind me, and it became my spirit animal of sorts.
Matthew's 32, but thinks he'll be a curmudgeon at 62.
I will say this though, I want to be one of those leathery old guys who still runs crazy marathons and is super fit. I want to be happy and healthy.
So can you imagine getting millions of people to decide voluntarily to watch a nearly 2-minute spot, right? That's what this is, right? And it's surrender and control. It's co-created with us together, and no ideas, getting the client to sort of buy into it. That's a great example of so many things that have to do with branding and chaos. This next one is the second one that is just another terrific example because it's so different. And this is a story about sort of one of the sort of hottest indie music stars in out of Denmark right now. Some of you will recognize him, and he composes when he runs.
I've been trying to write music for 3 days, and it just haven't happened for me. It's like I just haven't found the music. And then the first thing that popped to my mind was, you gotta go run. That's the medicine for me. Yeah, so like for instance, my feet, they sound kind of like a hi-hat. Then there is like dum 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 dum. It's kind of like counting inside.
He actually composed the song as part of making it.
And that instantly creates some kind of songs in your head. Hej, jeg hedder Mads Damsgaard Christiansen, og jeg søger musik gennem løb. I was like born like with a quietness in me. It feels very nostalgic or like natural. Whenever I feel too pressured or things are too noisy, then I try to find the quietness. You can never plan for magic, but you can make sure to work a lot and do your best and not let your mind get lazy.
So again, another co-creation, right? Both of those guys, neither of them identify as being runners. I'm not a runner, I'm a musician. I'm a creative person. Another one is this woman who won the Hubble, is a brilliant astronomer. She won the Hubble Fellowship for researching dark matter. She lives on a volcano in a big island of Hawaii. She camps outside this massive telescope and she just processes all this information at night, and then she actually runs to figure it out. So she basically, and she has a terrible stride. It's like, you usually have these beautiful runners in ads. She's like an awkward runner, but she just runs until she figures it out, right? Sometimes she like do a marathon around the volcano, and she's just like, she's not a runner, she's an astronomer solving the mysteries of dark matter, and she's doing it while she's running. Another is this famous chef in Montana who forages stuff. Well, you know what? If you forage stuff in Montana, being a runner is a pretty more efficient way to forage stuff, right? Oh, and he only has one arm. He lost an arm one time running. Long story how that happened. So he's a chef, but running enables what he cooks, right? So a really great example of collaboration and co-creation. Oh, the last one is experiment continuously. One of the themes, right? Order always comes out of chaos, but you don't know where it's going to come from, so you need to be trying a lot of different kinds of things. This is something called a Lumascape. If you're a media planner back in the days of Mad Men, you had 3 channels, and each channel had 10 shows. You had 30 options to choose from. This is what's happening. These are all the different technology providers and the typical technology stack of someone who uses online venues for reaching their customers. And so sort of pick how you're going to reach out, how you're going to engage your customers. This is one example of the complexity. So we use a very different approach from a media plan. We don't do flow charts. We practically call portfolio planning, which is sort of saying, okay, there's a lot of stuff going on. Some of it's relevant to your brand, some of it's where everyone is, it's commodity, others is sort of the battlefield, and others are places to test. So you start off and say, okay, here's an initial snapshot of some of the various channels that might make sense for a brand, and then you sort of narrow it down based on budgets and time frames, and then you kind of go, okay, let's, we're going to have some stuff in commodity because you got to be there. So in the running business, it's running magazines. Very few sales are made in running magazines because they're only read by people who are hardcore runners, and they already have their loyal brand. But you got to be there because you want the good reviews. So you're there. You minimize your dollars there. Battlefield is where stuff's being won and lost. So social media is obviously a battlefield for running brands right now. And then testable propositions are things. Let's try that. Right? Let's just try something in Periscope. Let's try something in whatever the flavor of the moment is. And if it works, let's optimize it. And then half of the stuff we try isn't going to work. That's not a failure. That's part of a test and learn optimization loop. This last one, I am just going to be part of it for the interest of time, but it's basically sort of thinking about the brand experience and not waiting for a wholesale revamp, but just constant improvement. So we're doing a big project for worst named supermarket brand in the world, Schnucks, out of St. Louis.